I know what you mean.
Where is it, like, in relation to, it's not that, okay, so it's, are you going to introduce yourself or yourself?
Yeah. Tell me what you do.
Okay, just introduce yourself to them.
Okay. Okay. How y'all doing today? I'm Darryl. I'm with Erlbacher's. I'm sure that most of you have seen us before. I'd like to welcome you to the Crank-In for 2022. We're finally glad to be having one. Today we're going to talk about factory settings. And the factory settings are just a baseline of information where if you have difficulty with your machine, you can go back to the baseline and you can customize your settings from there out. Now, all the machines are shipped with a kind of a little mini sock, and that is made at the baseline settings. So we know it works there. If you have difficulties, refer back to that. Of course, we are always there at the shop to be able to answer questions, and we even do video calls if you have anything you can't resolve yourself. But for today, let's talk about the factory settings. Our machine here has yarn on it, so I'm going to take it off real quick. And we'll talk first with the ribbings, the cylinder. And our cylinder has VCAM, which is this piece here. I'm sure most of y'all know this already, so please don't, I'm not trying to be insulting, just cover all the basics of it. And our VCAM has an indicator on the front of it, which is a brass piece, and on top of that, it has a jam nut. On the top of the jam nut is little numbers that are engraved, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And those were a reference so you know you can go back to a specific setting. I personally use that because my son's socks are different than mine, so I know where to go back to make his, to make mine. It's a lot more convenient that way. When we start at the shop, we set them from the top of the cylinder to the top of the VCAM to be approximately 1.25 inches. You can measure that with calipers like we do at the shop, or a ruler, anything of that you prefer to use. So I will just do it real quick here on this one to make sure we're set right. And that one's measuring about 1.23. So that's about 1.25 inches. It's a little bit less, but for our purposes, that's going to be perfectly fine. Once that one's set, it is always best to look at your number on the brass jam nut on top of it, and also to look at what line the indicator is sitting at. You can write that down. I do that all the time myself. Write down it's number 2 and then the second middle line. Then you know exactly where to go back to with it. Our yarn carrier is another one that we set at a baseline setting for it too. I personally use the ribbing system to set it with because you want the yarn carrier to go over the top of your ribber needles. So we'll put that in there. And I have no ribber needles. So we'll do it with a cylinder needle, but it should be a ribber needle, so please bear with me. When the needle is in place, you want your yarn carrier to go over the top of the ribber needle, and you want the thickness of a credit card from the top of the ribber needle to the bottom of the yarn carrier. Now, everybody has personal preferences. Again, we're just talking baseline settings. So once you get that set, you should have no problems. Same thing with the distance from the front of the yarn carrier to the cylinder needles, about the thickness of a credit card. Now, don't be afraid to take your yarn carrier and to bend it a little bit. Don't get real rough with it because it is brass and it can break. But if it seems like it's a little close on one side, further away on the other side, you can bend that around a little bit so that it feels better and it looks better for your purposes. We always want to watch where our yarn falls. That is really the key as to how our knitting goes. Our whole purpose in knitting is to trap the yarn in the needles and our latches to close to hold the yarn, and then the new yarn to come over the top of it and make a slip knot. Because as we all know, knitting is just a series of slip knots. I don't have anything set up to do that with, so I apologize. Now our ribber system, we'll pull it off here. Our ribber system has, I'm sorry, yes, please.
Quick question. How do you adjust the height of the
yarn carrier? Absolutely, yes. Our yarn carrier right down here has a little Phillips screw. That once you loosen that Phillips screw up, that bar, this one happens to be green, that bar will move up and down. You have to move it up and down by hand. My preference is to just loosen it a little bit, and I will tap on the top nut, or the bottom of it or top of it, to move it up or down, whichever way you want it. And you can move it really slightly that way. So that's why I prefer doing it that way. back to our ribber. Our ribber has a couple of different things that we want to make note of. We have a drive pin on the ribber. It's a 1/4-inch drive pin that goes in the hole in the top of it. And also there's an adjustment, which is actually a Phillips head screw. That sets our timing on the ribbing system. Once that screw is touching the drive pin, that's where all the magic's going to happen. That's what's going to make the needles come in and out. And our timing is adjusted by that screw. If you watch the needles, when you move the tappet plate, this is the tappet plate, by the way, probably should have said that to start with. When you move the tappet plate forward, counterclockwise direction, that will actually pull the needles in. So if you think in relationship to that screw, if the screw head comes backwards towards that pin, that's going to advance your timing to make your needles come in sooner. If you push it away from that pin, it's going to make the needles stay out longer. And you adjust that as you're knitting so you see the yarn fall. Where the yarn falls is key to everything. That's where you want it to land back. We have an adjustment over here where it adjusts the tension on your ribbing system. That one you usually don't have to adjust it much. I've seen folks move it one line. That's really the biggest I've seen them move, and that's when somebody was making a little baby sock. It was really cute. I'd love to learn how to do that myself. But that one will put tension up, just like on the cylinder. It'll adjust tension on your ribber as well. We set our baseline setting at the middle line. Again, that is just baseline settings. Everything can be customized beyond that. But if you set that middle line on it, we know it's going to work. That's the way we set it at the factory. Now, next to that, we have an in and out lever, is what we like to call it. It is engraved in and out. When it's in play, that means your needles will come into the yarn. So it will be in play, pulling your yarn in and out. When you put it out of play, the needles stay into the ribbing system. They will not go out to the yarn. So if you don't want to knit, put it in play. If you do want to knit, I'm sorry, I got that backwards. If you don't want to knit, put it out of play. If you do want to knit, in play. And you can also take out your drive pin, your 1/4-inch drive pin, and that will totally disengage the ribbing system. It'll just sit there as everything else spins around it. I personally have never done that, but I have not gotten into a lot of the fancier knitting, the 3x2s, 4x2s, and whatever else is out there nowadays. Height of your ribber is also another one that's super critical. Let me spin this around. Your ribber arm, which is this piece here, the pin on the bottom of it, and the ribber arm holder, which is piece down here. The pin and the hole for it are 1/2 of a thousandth of an inch different. So that is super close to each other. So when you put it in, I like to tell folks to hold it by the spine of the ribber arm, put it in, slide it down. And I say to hold it by the spine because if we hold it up on the top, we tend to tilt it forward or backward and it won't line up right. If you try to force it in because it's such a tight tolerance, it can mar and scar up and then it will not go in at all. Then you have to get something out to file the little burr off of it that we just created. So that's why I like to tell people hold it by the spine. It's easier to put something in straight when you've got a hold of something straight. Once it's dropped down into place, we have a jam nut here. It's a brass jam nut on the side of it, and that holds it in place, keeps it in the right position. If you ever have to adjust your height, excuse me, you ever have to adjust your height, at the very bottom, underneath where that jam nut is, there's a little set screw. And we have a lifter tool, which I will try to find in my pocket. Little lifter tool. This is a very old one, so it has a round head on it. The one that comes with machines now have a thumb screw on the bottom of it, and that will just slide into the bottom of it. There is an Allen head set screw down there, so it might take a minute to get it lined up. There it goes. And you have to make sure your jam nut's loose, and then you can twist it counterclockwise to raise the ribber up, clockwise to lower the ribber down. And
As you're looking at it.
Yes, correct. Looking at it from the top. And what we want for our purposes of clearance, we want to take the tip of that tool and we want that to go in between the ribber and the cylinder. Once that goes in between there, that's plenty of room for our yarn to flow through there. And we have to have the yarn flowing through it so the knitting process can continue. This one right now is a little bit low, so I'm going to raise it up. And that's probably just a hair bit too high, but we're not going to fight with that. These are our baseline settings again. Then we'll set our jam nut so that it's down. And if you listen to the ribber dial, you'll hear it click. That's when the fin of the ribber dial, which is right here, that's the fin, it is hitting the pin in the cylinder. This one happens to be at the back of the machine. But when those two engage, that's what makes the ribber spin. So typically when you put it in, you'll have yarn on your machine, and there'll be a blue paint mark on it. That's where the fin needs to go at. So when you slide it down in there, just give it a little shake, and if you hear the click, you know it's in the right position. If you don't hear that click, pull it out, put it back in again. If you trap yarn between the two, the fin and the pin, it won't flow, and you want the yarn to flow through it. There it is. There it is. There, now we got everything spinning. So that is the basic settings on it that we set at the factory. Again, something to refer back to if you need and you have difficulties. Anybody have any questions so far?
Would you repeat, when you're talking about setting the timing, which direction to make the needle latches open quicker or slower?
You're talking about the ribbing system, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's put a needle in here. With a needle in, and again, this is not the right needle, so bear with me on that. When we adjust the screw on the side of it and we pull the screw out towards the pin, move it around, the screw head, we're going to adjust it closer to the pin. That's going to advance the timing. That means that the needle will come in faster, sooner.
Close.
Yep, yes. If we push it in away from the pin, that'll make it come in slower.
Okay, thank you.
And the best way to do that is with yarn on it and watch where the yarn falls. You want your yarn to fall. Does everyone know the anatomy of a needle? Let's talk about that just real quick. Like the anatomy of a needle is we have a needle butt, which is on the back of it here. The ribber needles actually have two needle butts. One will be sticking up on the front. I apologize, I didn't bring one with me. And we'll have one on the back. So that's the needle butt. And the front of it, we're going to have a latch and the hook. And right in the middle of that latch is a little bit tiny pin. They call that the crux. We want our yarn to fall. You can see how it's got a little bit of a slope to it right here. We want our yarn to fall in front of that crux, in front of the latch, but not interfere with the hook of the needle. So we want it to fall on that little bit of a ramp. So there's a little variance in there that you can be off by a little bit and it'll still work perfectly fine as long as you're on that ramp at some point. And when you're knitting around on your machine, sometimes you'll notice it's different on one side than it is the other side. And that's because of the variance that we have in the different materials that we use. That's nothing that we can control, unfortunately. Another reason why we have a little bit of play in there. As long as it's falling in that location on both sides of the machine, you shouldn't have any problems at all. The bane of our existence in knitting has been magnetism, we have discovered. And that little latch, when it gets magnetized, it will not do what you want it to. Your tools get magnetized, like your lifter tool, your hooks, your latches, everything gets magnetized. And that little needle, if you wave something over it, the little latch will move with it. So if you have a lot of drop stitches, you cannot figure out why, start looking for something that's magnetized. They have a device they sell. I know Amazon has them. I can't tell you a price. We have one downstairs. If you have that problem while you're here, you can just swipe it across the demagnetizer and it will take the magnetism out of it. We had a cranking a couple of years ago where we had an electrical storm that was in the area and everybody had massive problems, and it was because of magnetism. So we try to tell people, if you're using a computer or a cell phone or an iPad, don't put it right next to the machine because they do create magnetism. And we want to avoid that. Keep it a couple feet away if you can. No magnets. A lot of folks were using a magnetic holder for their needles. Well, that magnetism will transfer to the needles and you'll have nothing but problems. So avoid magnetism at every possible cost. And we will have a demonstration tomorrow at 2 about the maintenance on the machine. So we'll go into more of what to oil, things of that nature also. But I do want to say, while we're talking about baseline settings, when you knit, I'm sure you've all seen the yarn fuzz that gets on your machine and the oil seems to attract it. When you see that accumulating, wipe it off. That will change how your needles act in ways that I never imagined possible. My needles were hanging up. They weren't dropping down like they were supposed to. And a lot of the stuff works by gravity. So if it's not easy for the needle to drop down, it's not going to be down waiting for the yarn to grab the yarn in time. And I did that several times before I realized that I have to clean the little slots out in the cylinder also because the yarn fuzz will get stuck in the slots. and I'm not real big at cleaning my equipment up. I just like to use it and keep using it and go and go. So every so often, take it off, wipe it out. I've even used the little cans of air we use on our keyboards at home to blow the little slots out in it. Use your pick, wipe the slots out in it. Same thing with your ribber dial. Cleanliness is next to godliness, they say. And I do believe in that thoroughly with these machines. Yes, sir.
Do you have to take the needles out to spray the slots?
I would absolutely recommend it. Yeah, otherwise, because the needles are, this is one continuous piece of metal that has been formed. The machines are fascinating to watch them work. So yeah, there's little niches on it and little pockets in it. So yeah, absolutely. Take them out. Take your needles out. And I like to, when I'm cleaning my machine, I take my needles out and I throw them all in a bucket with some oil and let them soak overnight. If there is any rust developing on it, anything of that nature, that oil usually cleans it off. And it keeps them good and lubricated because that latch is a moving part. And you have to remember that. We'll go into more of that at the oiling, the maintenance sections also. Anybody else?
There's a question online. You can read it behind you.
Oh, well, we're fancy here, aren't we?
I was saying we got Diana. This is can Darryl show the credit card difference and alignment from another angle? See, the football was blocking.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. How about we do it like that? And what we're talking about is from the front of the yarn carrier to the needles. You can see this one's significantly closer than what we're talking about. I'm not going to change it because somebody else was knitting on this and they had it set for a reason, but we want enough distance where a credit card will go down in here. And same thing with a ribber needle. Let me crank around so we can get, oh, left one in. That's a bad idea. Same thing with coming over the top of it. I'm going to crank around here. And of course, I'll drop it. This is not a ribber needle, but bear with me with that. We want to do the same thing here. We want about a credit card's distance from the top of the needle to the bottom of the yarn carrier. Hope that's a better angle for everyone to see. Any other questions? Oh. Yeah, that is the baseline settings that we use at the shop. And again, please don't hesitate. If you ever have any questions or any problems, give us a call.